This is the second part of the tutorial, which is focusing on the challenges to traditional power and authority in Japan from 1921 to 1929. In the first tutorial, we focused on the political implications and the political challenges facing the Taisho democracy, and the challenges that the priest preservation law, male suffrage, as well as the implications of new and these foreign ideas and the impact that they had on the Taisho political environment during this period of time. In this second part of the tutorial, we're really going to hone in on the economic implications, focusing particularly on the Great Kanto earthquake and the Showa financial crisis. Just to remind you of our focus question for this tutorial, remember we're talking about the extent that the Taisho democracy effectively managed the pressures of the 1920s. And, we can return to those earlier quotes about how, the Taisho democracy really needed to be flexible to manage the pressures, the emerging modernization and changes of the particular period. Just remind you again, this is the kind of focus of what we're looking at in this set of tutorials, which are focusing on these challenges to traditional power. So in that first tutorial, we really focused on the constitutional as well as the political parties and the impact that they had on the Taisho democracy. In this tutorial, we're going to be more focusing on the Zaibatsu, these large family conglomerates who really control the private capital in Japan, as well as the broader kind of economic climate of the time. And then in part 3 of the tutorial, we're going to be focusing on the third group, which is oligarchs. So the Genro, the army, and the bureaucratic elites. But let's look at the economic impacts. So the 1920s really begin with a revival of, a stabilization of the period after, the boom that we see after World War One. So in April 1920, we have a stock market crash. This is known as the kind of forgotten depression. We have some banks failing, unemployment is going to rise, production is going to fall up to 40%. And so, during World War One, if you remember from the survey, we really focused on the idea that they had to go through this massive boom. We have inflation, we have, they become one of the largest suppliers of ammunition to the Allies. And we also have, as a part of that, the negative consequences, which is things like rice riots as well in 1918. This is then compounded by an earthquake in 1923, where it was 7.9 magnitude, which struck Yokohama and Tokyo. As you can see on the slide, it leads to between 100,000 to 200,000 dead, and leads to the destruction of around 570,000 dwellings. And as a result of this, 3/4 of the city is engulfed in a massive firestorm. At this time, there's a lot of open fires, hibachi grills, which obviously when an earthquake happens, these are going to be destabilized and they're going to lead to a massive firestorm. At this time, remember that Tokyo is very much and has been constructed during the 17th and 18th century, so a lot of it is made out of timber, and so it gets engulfed in flame, and so it leaves 60,000 people homeless. You can see postcards that really represent the drama and the devastation of the particular time. As a result of this, we really see a reinforcement of traditional Shinto ideas. And they believe that the earthquake was a punishment from the ancestors for the unhealthy, corrupt state that had formed during the 20th century in Japan. And it really leads to an anti-Western and anti-foreigner campaign. Of particular note is the target against Koreans and Chinese, of which there's a massive kind of racial violence that happens on the streets of Tokyo, where people go around killing Korean people, and there's a real kind of backlash against these because they represent the new kind of emerging ideas that we see in Japan, which Japanese people are trying to resist. And so this is part of that protection of that kotuhai, of that Japanese essence, of that Japanese nationalism. They believe that Western influences is corrupting the country in some way. moving on from this, because so much of Tokyo and Yokohama is destroyed, we have this then fuels a new kind of spending spree where we see development, we see a huge amount of infrastructure, buildings. A lot of this is supported by government loans, and even despite the anti-Western sentiment in 1923 by a lot of people, we see a further influence of the West. Things like cinemas start getting built, cafes. Of particular note is the Ginza area, which, as you can see in the image on the right-hand side there, really gets redeveloped, during this period of time. This is where we're going to see first department stores. We're really going to see modern infrastructure. This is going to be a real kind of hub for socializing in modern Tokyo. By 1923, the small banks had begun to experience financial pressures, leading to the central bank, the Bank of Japan, to intervene and provide these special loans to failing banks. And the government provides loans of up to 100 million yen. The Kenzatai Prime Minister at the time, Wakatsuki, sought to use bonds to finalize the Bank of Japan debts. But this leads to problems because one of the ministers declared that the Tokyo Watanabe Bank had become bankrupt, leading to what's known as a run on banks. This is when all of the people who have money in that bank go to the bank and withdraw all the money at the same time. Obviously, the bank, doesn't have all of the money that has been deposited, in the bank at that time, because they've obviously used it to invest and buy other things with it. And so it really leads to a massive panic that spreads across Japan. As a result of this, we see the Prime Minister is forced to resign, and we see a new Prime Minister, Tanaka Gichi, who comes into, by early May, he had steadied the banks. But as a result of this, 37 of the banks have become consumed by the Zaibatsu. So they even control more and more private capital within Japan. So this further strengthens the kind of the stranglehold that the Zaibatsu have on the Japanese economy. So this financial crisis is really about kind of moral panic about what's happening with the banks, what's happening with my money. And again, we see this kind of panicked state in Japan. A part of this as well, in agriculture, we still have very much a tenant farming agreement. This is where the landlord will lease it out to farmers to actually farm on the land. During World War I, these tenant farmers have began to join together for the first time. We see the emergence of this newly formed labor movement in Japan, during the 1910s and 1920s. So between 1923 to 1931, we have 1,500 to 2,700 tenant-landlord disputes, which took place every single year. And we see unions such as the Japan Farmers Union in 1922, really growing. Initially, because of the political climate at the time, there are laws to try and come to resolutions with these issues. But as we're going to continue on, these are going to become more and more violent. And you can see here, social historian Anne Waswo in 1996 said that tenants were expected to step aside if they encountered anyone of superior status on the village road or footpath. This is how tenant farmers were kind of treated. They're at the beck and call of their landlords to perform chores in the landlord's fields or in the landlord's homes, even if this meant delaying vital chores of their own. If they were given a meal at the day's end of their labor, they received it gratefully and consumed it in a dark corner of the landlord's kitchen. So we really see this kind of divide between those people who have money and those people who don't. So we spoke a lot in the last tutorial about this new rich, these kind of new emerging social class in Japan, which really are boosted by the industrial capacity and modernization that Japan is going through in this early 20th century. And so the gap between rich and poor is only widening further. And you can see here, in 1930 novel, it talks about the distinction about who these landlords are. Kabahashi Tajiko calls them a strange breed of fish, like mermen. The upper part is landlord, but the lower part is capitalist. Okay, and this idea of the lower part, this kind of capitalism is really kind of driving these landlords at this period of time. And so this is the further kind of divides Japanese society. We see this really drive towards capitalist style thinking, which is challenging this kotohai, this national essence where everyone is meant to be kind of harmoniously working together. A key part of this real drive towards capitalism is really driven by the Zaibatsu. So these are large conglomerates, large business groups that gain a huge amount of economic power and political influence. They are they have a feudalistic relationship between the superiors and subordinates, where we see these families having control over the whole company. And so if you are part of the family, you are part of the kind of upper tier of the particular company. They control links between the different member firms, and they have a huge influence from the finance through their banks. I already spoke to you before about the Showa financial crisis and the smaller banks that get absorbed by these larger Zaibatsu. And so they're just continuing to amass huge amounts of private capital. They have dozens of corporations, which was held together by a single kind of holding company, which was controlled by a single family. This normally gives the name to that particular company. The only kind of one that doesn't hold true to this is the Mitsubishi, which is controlled by the Iwasaki family. So, but we have like the Mitsu Zaibatsu, we have the Kawasaki Zaibatsu, Nintendo Zaibatsu. Okay, these are all Zaibatsus that are formed during this period of time. And through their banks, they spread their power. They continue to have a stranglehold on Japanese economy. You can see here, these are the two largest, the Mitsu and the Mitsubishi. You can see the different things that they control. We're looking at trade, mining, real estate, chemicals, agriculture, life insurance. And then you can see all of their designated subsidiaries, which they are also controlling as well. So you can see how they amass such large fortunes. Initially, the Zaibatsu were supported, in the old Meiji Restoration. They are given a huge amount of, public money by the government, these subsidies which get poured into the Zaibatsu because they can produce things for much cheaper than what the government can at this period of time. And so the government gives subsidies to these private companies in order to boost production, during the 1870s, 1880s. And so that is when they are kind of first really kind of starting to grow. Then they become much more involved in the 1910s and 1920s with the emergence of these political parties. So the Masato, they were backed by the Mitsubishi Zaibatsu. The Seiyukai is backed by the Mitsu Zaibatsu. So they prioritize autonomy and stability, and they didn't have any consistent or principles of support for kind of democratic or liberal policies. All they wanted is a party that was going to allow them to continue doing business, and allow them to continue to really, control Japanese economy. You can see here that we see some leading intellectuals being very critical and saying that the new Taisho democracy should be rooted in the people, but instead it's being captured by these private interests. These Zaibatsu who really have, a stranglehold on politics and on the economy. You can see here that it's referring back to earlier events where we look at Harakei and he established a strike-breaking organization of the Japan National Essence Society, this group which is going to protect Kodohai, and this is really launched after the 1918 rice riots and the series of riots that we have happening across 1918, 1919, and 1920. So that is the economic challenges posed by the period. We look at key events such as the Great Kanto earthquake and the Showa financial crisis, and also when it comes to key groups like the Zaibatsu and the challenges that they placed on this, constitutional democracy that we have during the Taisho period. And so you can see that the Taisho, democracy is being pulled apart by these different elements, and because of the constitutional weaknesses, because of the political weaknesses, because of their inability to kind of bring in laws which are going to stop, democracy being, eroded away, it is slowly going to start to come apart. What we can look at in part 3 is the last group of these, which are going to start to tear away at the democratic fibers of Japan. That is going to be the bureaucratic elite. They are going to prioritize stability, structure, order, conservatism, and in doing so, trying to take power for themselves. So I'll see you in our next tutorial.